Hello and welcome to Random Fandoms, a video series from Billings Public Library about the things that we love. Today I'm really pleased to be bringing you a conversation with author Gail Z Martin. Martin is the author of several fantasy series, from epic fantasy all the way to steampunk. And she also does male paranormal romance under the name of Morgan Bryce. And today we're talking about her early fandoms, how they shaped her career as a writer, and also go into a little bit of what those early fandoms looked like pre-internet days. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did having it, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right, welcome Gail Z Martin to Billings Public Library. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you finally. And we're here to talk about fandoms and authorship, I think is one way to put it. And I was reading your chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done a little bit earlier, and you mentioned your first fandom there and what it did for you. Could you talk a little bit about that to start off with?
Sure. So nowadays I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, near future post-apocalyptic stories, and more. And under my other pen name, Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. So I kind of, really stretch across genres. But my very first fandom when I was a kid, actually a preschooler, was Dark Shadows, which was a Gothic soap opera that was on in the 1960s. I don't know why my mom thought it was appropriate for a preschooler, but that's okay. And it had vampires and werewolves and witches and magic and time travel and all this kind of stuff. I was totally hooked. I mean, I was hooked. Mm-hmm. And I think that definitely set me on the path to where I am now. And I always clarify that I mean a writer and not a vampire.
Okay.
But I mean, I still remember parts of those stories, and I was a really little kid. So that just made me interested in reading ghost stories and reading things that had those supernatural creatures in them. And it didn't, at some point, loving to read all that stuff made me go, wow, I'd like to make up my own stories about these things. And a number of years later, here I am.
Mm-hmm. But you began, so did you begin writing more like the horror Gothic genre, or did you begin with the epic fantasies that you first published?
Well, when I really started out, it was again due to some other fandoms. I absolutely fell in love with the original Star Trek. Now, it was on in reruns when I was a kid, but it just captivated me. This idea, it was a very turbulent time in the late 1960s when I was watching the reruns in the early 1970s. And the idea that we could have this really terrific future where everybody got along and all the things that seemed to be so impossible to get past had been figured out. And I fell in love with Star Trek. And there were other shows. Star Wars, of course, came out, and the very first movies, but there were some other TV shows like Hawaii Five-0 and Space 1999. And some of them went off the air. Some of them were already off the air by the time I discovered them. So there weren't going to be any new episodes. And I had other friends who enjoyed them too. And I thought, well, why don't I write new episodes? I can come up with new stories with these characters. And I had no idea at the time that this was transformative works or fan fiction. I just knew that I wanted to read stories about my favorite characters, and my friends wanted to read them too, so I started writing them. And so, my friends would come over to my house and they'd go, did you get the next chapter done? And I'd hand them the handwritten or manually typed, because that's all we had a manual typewriter, and hand it to them, and then we'd sit in my room and they'd read it, and then they'd give me feedback. And I learned from that I enjoyed telling stories. And they gave me good feedback on what they thought would make it better or what they liked or didn't like. And so I learned that I could amuse people and entertain them with my stories. And that was a huge confidence boost. And of course, this was long before people posted fan fiction on the internet. Regular people didn't have access to the internet. That was something, it was there, but it was experimental, and normal people didn't have access. But there were such a thing as fanzines. And fanzines were created by fans and had collections of fan art and fan fiction. And people would put these together out of the love for the fandom, probably run them off the copier at work after hours. A little bootleg culture here going on. And then usually sell them just to cover the cost of the copy paper. And if you went to a convention, or you found out through word of mouth that there was a fanzine that had your fandoms in it, you could send them $5 and they'd mail you the fanzine. And so I ran a fanzine for 3 or 4 issues back before I went to college, and read other people's fanzines. And again, that taught me a lot about the craft of writing, and it gave me a lot of confidence that I could entertain people and that they'd want to read what I had to write. So all those fandoms got me to the point where, and then of course I was also reading other authors' books, and I loved epic fantasy. I loved all the medieval stuff and the sword and sorcery and the magic. And so after a while, I thought, well, I think this is really what I want to write. And I went to college to do, my major was medieval history, because I knew I wanted to write about it. And so my first book, The Summoner, was actually sword and sorcery, epic fantasy, and that whole Chronicles of the Necromancer series. That's what it is. And I've written 4 epic fantasy series so far, and a bunch of urban.
Yeah. So just real quick, was your fanzine a Star Trek fanzine, or were you doing other fandoms by that point? Just out of curiosity.
It was multiple fandoms. It was Star Trek and Star Wars, and a TV show called The New Avengers, which disappeared after a year. It was kind of an updated version of not the Marvel Avengers, but the Avengers with Diana Riggs, Steed and Mrs. Peel.
And
and there were several others, and it was pretty much just a labor of love with me and some other friends.
Right. Wow. So I can just say from my own personal experience was that I sort of began to discover fan fiction kind of at the beginning of the internet, really. And at that time it was Mulder and Scully, and that was the kind of stuff that I was interested in. So then with your epic fantasy, just changing gears a little bit, there is definitely a strong family element, I think, especially in Chronicles of the Necromancer, from what I've seen. It begins with a betrayal, right? And so do you find, and I know certainly with like Star Trek, there's a found family there. Dark Shadows is about an insane family with that has ghosts and werewolves and vampires and everything. Do you find that those themes that did you find themes in your fandoms that you then brought into your works, or do you see those sort of after the fact, after you're done writing?
I think there is a lot that when you look back on things you've written, you may have put in there without consciously thinking about it, themes that are just important to you as a person. And certainly the idea of found family is very important to me. We don't always fit into the family that we were born into. We don't really have any choice about that, but we can pick the people to be around us that we enjoy being with, and whom we can support and who have our backs. And that's a very important theme to me. And I think it resonates with a lot of people. And that really follows through all of my series, no matter what the genre is.
Mhm.
Sometimes some of the characters have loving and nurturing families. Most of the time they don't.
Right.
Their family may be dead, their family may just really be dysfunctional, they may have left, they may have been thrown out. And so they find this tight group of friends that becomes their new family. And I think that is, that's really an underlying theme in all my stuff, both as Gail and as Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
So when you so as you've been writing, are you discovering new fandoms as you go, or how does your writing now relate to the properties that you appreciate now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I still love reading fantasy. I still love watching TV shows that have magic. I like that honestly better than stuff about the real world, because I read to escape the real world. I don't want to read about real things. I can read the news for that.
Right.
And I think probably one of the biggest things that has come into my life from a fandom perspective is I fell down the rabbit hole for Supernatural. And that they've got 15 seasons, so it's a really deep rabbit hole.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't come into it at the very beginning. It started in 2005, and I was busy with other things. Then I don't get to watch a whole lot of TV.
Mm-hmm.
But people had recommended it to me, and I thought, well, this could be fun. Well, when I finally did come to it, which was 4 years ago, it was kind of like, where have you been all my life? And I fell in love. We binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months so that I was ready to start watching season 12 when it started to come out. And I started live tweeting the episodes. And then I got to know other fans on Twitter. And as I watched the show, the thing, writers are magpies. We are always looking at real life and at everything we consume to say, what would be good in a book? Wow, how can I use that? And that can be sitting at a restaurant, listening to the people at the next table, overhearing their conversation. You go, ooh, I can use that. We're magpies. And so when you watch a show, the writer part of your brain is going, what's working here? What is pulling me in? What element of this is really hooking me? And can I, dust that off separate from whatever show or movie it is? And does that have a place in what I'm doing? And with all the found family stuff, I'd always written ensemble casts where you might have 4 or 5 people in the main group. And in an epic fantasy book, you might have 4 or 5 different viewpoints, which is how they get to be so thick.
Right.
And even in the urban fantasy, it was more group oriented. And one of the things I kind of walked away from Supernatural with, not that I've walked away, I'm still very, very intense in it, is the buddy flick element of it. That you've got 2 guys who are, in this case, brothers. But if you think of all the buddy flick movies, they might be police partners, they might be best friends, they might be, some other connection, but they really, really care about each other and trust each other and have each other's backs. And so that was a big takeaway from me. And I've done some new series that have that buddy flick element in it, because I always enjoyed buddy flick romance kind of movies, and thought, well, it's kind of different. Let me play with that. But I've also found that being part of the fandom has given me, a wonderful new fandom family. I run a fairly large Supernatural group on Facebook. I've been to the conventions, have a chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done.
Right.
And that's another one of those great found families that really has your back. And so I think that is such a wonderful outgrowth of fandom, is that it doesn't happen in every fandom. It doesn't happen to the same degree. Supernatural fans are known for being kind of crazy. But when it happens, it's a beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah. And it's such, it's expanded the fandom world a lot, I think, specifically the internet, and being able to have this sort of instant connection with people, not just with the show, but also with, you know, other fans who are passionate about it and just really want to talk about it or write their own fanfic. And it is definitely a different kind of experience, I think, from the original. Certainly my initial things that I fell in love with, things like detective novels like Nero Wolfe. I went seriously down the hole for Nero Wolfe when I was in high school, and but I was mostly doing that on my own. You know, I had to really seek out, you know, all of the there is a lot written about Nero Wolfe and Rex Stout, but I really had to search it out. You know, I had to like go to libraries and look in the old bound magazine racks and stuff like that. These days it's a lot easier to find all of that stuff, I think. Do you think that there's a downside to that? I kind of went 180 there, but
well, you know, I remember when I totally fell in love with Star Trek, and nobody else I knew liked the show, had watched the show, and I was bursting with all this enthusiasm and these things I thought about when I watched the episode, and there was no one who wanted to talk about it, and that was very lonely. That was very disappointing. I still talk to them about it, and you know, they weren't interested. So you know, I was the crazy person who liked Star Trek. And I think one of the wonderful things about the internet is that you don't have to be alone with stuff that you like now. You can find groups, and there are all kinds of groups for everything that share your passion. And maybe you live in a small town and nobody else likes this stuff, but it doesn't matter because you're online.
Right.
I think downside, you know, as with anything with the internet, you have to pick your group carefully. Some groups let people misbehave and behave badly. Other groups really keep a tight lid on that and don't let that sort of thing fester. So you have to find a place where you feel safe and comfortable and welcome and accepted for who you are. And you might have to try several groups. And you know, the best thing is, they call it lurking. The best thing is to lurk in a group for a while before you really put yourself out there and kind of see what people are posting and what kind of comments, and are there trolls? Is the general vibe supportive, or do people get real critical? And you can figure that out real fast before you put yourself out there to be vulnerable, by watching how the group reacts to other posts. And if it's not the right group for you, you can back out and leave, and there's no damage done. And that's kind of, I think, the best thing for any online activity is, you know, watch first and tiptoe in.
Right. Well, that's good advice. And that's something I think that you handled really well in your Supernatural group is, you know, you keep everything fun and respectful at the same time. And, you know, so we can have conversations and it's not slanted too far in one direction or the other, you know, and I really appreciate that. And then as you also have another group that you're involved with, which is Continual, which we've worked with a little bit here at the library, and I've watched quite a few of the videos. So that is actually a group of authors and artists, and you're posting like convention style videos. How did that get started?
Well, I was on vacation and everything blew up about lockdown. And I thought, you know, some author friends and I had been talking about how it would be great to have an online place that was good for all genres, epic and urban fantasy, mystery, romance, horror. Some genres like romance have a lot of territory out there on the internet. Epic fantasy, urban fantasy has some, epic fantasy, very little of this sort of participatory thing.
Okay.
And then the lockdown came and I thought, okay, nobody's going to be able to go anywhere. This gives everybody more time to build this and nothing to do, so they're going to be interested in anything that amuses them. This is the perfect time to build this.
Mm-hmm.
So I built the group in Facebook originally, and then I, messaged some of my friends, and they know me well, and I said, hey, I did a thing. You guys want to be in on it? And so we now have a very, very involved operating committee that comes up with the programming and does the invitations. But the goal here is to create as close to an online convention, genre convention experience as we can. And we're expanding beyond Facebook onto a website and Discord and Twitch and YouTube. But right now it's primarily on Facebook.
Right.
And so we have panels talking about book launches, talking about different aspects of genre writing, whether it's, vampires or werewolves or ghosts or whatever it is. We do, we have a vendor room. We have musicians and performers that come and do live or recorded shows.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a slate of holiday programming coming up,
for
October, November, and December, because we
Okay.
figure the holidays are going to be weird this year. People may not be able to travel or might not have people coming to them. We're all probably going to have a little more time on our hands than usual. And so we want to be a diversion and entertainment and kind of lighten the load for everybody and have a fun place where they can go and see interesting new stuff.
Right.
But what's really cool is in bringing in friends and friends of friends and doing all these panels on the different topics is we, most conventions, if you're not talking San Diego Comic-Con, most conventions are pretty local. They might draw people from the same state, but you're not going to have people come over from another country. With an online convention, we've done a number of panels with British authors joining us, and authors from New Zealand, and authors from the West Coast who wouldn't be able to attend your local convention. So they get to meet readers who might not have ever gotten to meet them in real life. And their readers get to see authors that they might never have had an actual experience with. And then, for people, there are people who have difficulty attending live conventions aside from the current unpleasantness because they're mobility impaired, or they have health concerns, or they have a lot of social anxiety and they don't like to be in a crowd. Continual takes away all those barriers. And so we intend for it to be an ongoing online multi-genre convention that never ends. It's fun while we're all staying home more, but once this passes and we get back to whatever normal is normal, we intend to continue to still be there and go on for the foreseeable future.
That's exciting. I'm happy to hear that, for sure. And one of the things that you can do there is you can also talk about the books and the properties, the items that people have coming up. And you mentioned you've got a couple of things in the works that'll be out soon, things that I can look for.
Sure. Well, one of them is Trick or Treat at Canham Castle. And that we also have, last year we brought out Christmas at Canham Castle. And these are collections, multi-author collections. There were 7 authors in the Christmas book, 4 in the Trick or Treat book, where all of the stories take place in the same fictional castle and the same holiday ball or bonfire, whatever the big event is, masquerade. But each of the authors writes with their own characters, their own story. So it's a shared world around that holiday, but the stories are all unique to the authors. And so those are fun. It's always fun to do holiday books. And then probably the newest Gail Z Martin book is Fugitive's Vow, which is coming out soon. We're just in the process of putting the polish on it with the editing. And then also Creature Feature, which is the newest in the Spell, Salt, and Steel series, and that should be out October 6th.
Okay, wonderful. And where can we find you online?
Well, you can find the epic and urban stuff at gailzmartin.com. The Z is really important because there are other Gail Martins out there. And then if you're interested in the urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, come look for me at morganbryce.com, and that's BRICE.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I very much appreciate it. And hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me. This was fun.